Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's meetup with the React Africa. I just want to do, as usual, we just do a quick run through of our sponsors to thank them for giving us the support that allows us to bring you these talks. So first of all, our recurring sponsors, that's NML, software development company in Cape Town, who've sponsored us for over 10 years now. And IO Digital, which is also a software development company in Cape Town. They've been supporting us for a couple of years, and Liesel, their operations manager, has been a great supporter of ours over the years. We have if you may have seen that we ran a hackathon this last weekend, which in conjunction with the ZA product design people, and it was a great success. This is not updated. That should not say July, it should say September. And we have another hackathon weekend that's coming up then. Yeah, so keep an eye out for that. I'm just going to hand over now to Mike, who will introduce tonight's speaker and introduce the talk for us. Off you go. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Justin. Yeah, I'm Mike. Thanks to everyone that's joined so far. I think we're in for an interesting chat. We've got Will joining us today, Will Francis, if I remember right.
Yep.
And he's going to be chatting to us about architecting a healthy React app, having a code base that can scale in a friendly manner. He's going to share some of his experience there for us. Awesome. Well, if you're ready, please feel free to take it away.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction. So my name's William, as you just heard. I'm a tech enthusiast. I love solving puzzles and coming up with creative solutions to problems. And I'm the youngest of 7 siblings. At the age of 3, my brothers would let me hold the spare gamepad. And I had the most fun just watching them because obviously it wasn't actually plugged in. And from there, I actually grew a love of technology and engaging with games and the medium. And I slowly learned to program as a kid. From that interest, I then went on to study computer science at UCT. And I've spent over 10 years in the industry, and my current role is a tech lead at a company called GradConnection. So I'm not sure if other people experience this type of thing, but I do a lot of thinking about my field. And the longer I spend in IT, the more I start to compare the real world to computer science. And I've caught myself thinking about objects around me and thinking about the object composition of the objects. So I'll see a car and I'll think about how it's made up of properties and attributes and which parts are core to the elements or core elements of the car. How is the car related to other cars? How would a smaller car be inherited of the bigger object of the car? And I kind of think about the real world from my personal experience. I once did a deep dive into the difference between sending lots of smaller files to the front end versus sending one batch file. And I managed to skim off a number of microseconds using smaller files, but at the cost of network latency, which is obviously measured in milliseconds, which is quite a large order of magnitude slower. So this kind of thinking inspired me to carry all my groceries from the car in one trip rather than making many trips. So from this, I love actually presenting tech talks using practical real-world situations. And so hopefully this will help you relate and also get you thinking about real-world solutions that can help you to code. In my previous tech talk, I actually did a talk on runtime errors and compile time errors. And I did the talk using a comparison between the recipe for chicken soup. So was the onion in the ingredients list before the step where you asked to cut it? Because this could obviously lead to a variable not defined error if you say in the ingredients list to do that. Or if you want to say, take the chicken out the oven, but you haven't actually had an instruction before that to put the chicken in the oven. So I really enjoy thinking about coding solutions in a practical sense. So today, I'm going to do a deep dive into my practical scenario of moving house and the various strategies you can employ. I also want to note that if you leave this tech talk knowing the best folder structure to use, then I would have failed in my mission. Okay, so this is just a summary. I'm going to cover the home packing strategy. I'm going to go through some practical folder examples, official React recommendations, and some tips to take home. So, the best home packing strategy. Spoiler, there is no one size fits all. Okay, so this is the scenario. You're a young teenager. Your family is moving home, and it's your job to pack your room. What strategy do you use? So, because you're young, your parents will probably do the heavy lifting, and all the furniture and bedding and stuff will be sorted. You're kind of probably tasked just to deal with the things that you deal with, like your favorite toys and that sort of thing. Maybe your Lego, maybe some books. And so for you, it probably makes sense to have the one box strategy. That is, you get a big box, you put everything in, you write your name on it, and then wherever it goes, that's probably where you'll end up. Okay, then scenario 2. You're now actually an older teenager. Your family is moving home, and it's your job to pack up your room. What strategy do you use? At this point in life, you're a bit mature, and you don't want your parents rifling through all of your things, so you kind of opt to pack your own stuff. You'll need a box for clothing, a box for your schoolwork, and a box for all of your hobbies. Okay, next scenario, scenario 3. You're now a student. You're moving into your university digs. You'll need to pack your room, as well as all the basic kitchen, bathroom, and living items. What strategy do you use? You could probably follow the previous strategy of having multiple boxes for each room, but this would mean that you would have a top-level ordering based on your rooms, and the higher level group of boxes would be your room, of your kitchen, your bathroom, and your living room. But what about if you had another high-level box called essentials? So maybe you need the items that you'll need for the first 7 days of being in there. So these things could be like your toothbrush or your cell phone charger. How would you incorporate this box of essentials into your strategy? So what you could do is you could have a box of essentials per room. So you could have the toothbrush in your bathroom's essentials. You could have your pots and pans that you'll need in the first week in your kitchen essentials, and your charger and laptop could be in your bedroom essentials. But you could also have a separate section called your essentials. And so you could get items from each one of your separate rooms and put that in the box of essentials. So now you need to decide which items need to go into the essential, and you're the person making the choice. There's no clear boundary between whether the toothbrush should always go in the box that's in the bathroom or the box that's in the essential. It comes down to the strategy that you use. And as long as you stick to a strategy that makes sense, then it should be easy to find the items that you want. Okay, what you could also do is you could have the essentials box. And if there are so many items in this essential box, you could split it by category and start having the kitchen essentials, the bathroom essentials, and the bedroom essentials inside of the box of essentials. And so when you open this big box, you'll know how to actually get the small items inside it. Okay, you are now an adult. You're moving into your own home. What strategy do you use? So now there are so many boxes that you can't possibly pack them all yourself. This is when sharing your strategy is very important, because you need to let your moving team get involved with the packing, and they need to be able to follow on with whatever strategy you use. So it's not just about you knowing the strategy, you now need to pass the strategy on. Everyone needs to be on the same page, and everyone needs to know which items the boxes go into. So now there's a new spanner in the works. There's actually a logistical problem where heavy items need to be moved first in a moving lorry, which is an expensive endeavor. And so you'll need to actually have a separate section for all your heavy items. You can no longer keep the fridge in the kitchen box. You now need to move it separately. And so these items need to be packed separately. And this external constraint stops you from having your previous strategies that you might want. But now we get to a new item, new problems. What about the microwave? Should the microwave go in the kitchen box, or should it go with the moving lorry? Is it heavy enough to justify putting on a lorry, or should it actually go in the kitchen? And this is when constraints become important, because maybe it's expensive that you're paying per weight in the moving lorry, or maybe the microwave is just too big to fit in your particular car, or too heavy for you to move. So it's important to then decide how items will be categorized and where they will go. The other thing you could think about is it expensive? Like, will it be very expensive if it breaks? And maybe the moving van has insurance. And so there are other factors that can go into the packing strategy. Okay, so now you're married and you want to start a family, and so you move into a larger home. What strategy do you use? You can no longer pack your one bathroom to unpack on the other side, because you've already made it in life. You finally have that luxury of your own bathroom as well as a guest bathroom. You even have a guest lounge and a guest kitchen. So should you make a larger grouping inside of your bedroom for the guest sections? Or would it make more sense now to have a whole guest section, and inside of that, it will have its own bathroom, kitchen, and bedroom? When your guest does arrive, you won't have control over what they put or where they put their items and how they'll unpack. So hopefully the strategy that you use makes sense so that they can then continue the strategy that you've used. The point is, there'll never be a one-size-fits-all solution. And thinking outside the box is quite useful. I'm going to start showing you a folder structure of these kind of examples just to help ground in some code. So this is using, yeah. The very basic one is we have a one box folder. So we put all of our files inside of this one box. And I'm sure we've all been there when we're junior developers and we're just getting in. We have our hello world situation, and we kind of have one file. And maybe we'll have some functions, maybe some variables declared, but everything happens in that one file. When I was starting, I was very hesitant to move to that second file. I loved everything being in one place and being able to see everything, be able to scroll. Sorry.
Well, you'll have to share your screen again.
Okay, sorry. I think I accidentally clicked a hotkey. Okay, sorry about that. Can you see my screen now? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I was very hesitant to move to the two file structure because I loved being able to just scroll up and down and see everything inside of my file. Obviously, as you grow, this becomes quite difficult to maintain. When you start having thousands of lines of code, you need to start moving to your separate files. So the next strategy. So now we've got multiple boxes. So we've got the books, we've got the clothes, we've got the hobbies and schoolwork. And inside of these things would be all the items. This is kind of easier to unpack. So when you get to the new location, you know where your clothes are, and you can easily get that box and start working with it. The next situation, so now we've got each room is a folder, and inside of those rooms will be the different categories and boxes. In the home example, where you're a student, so you've just moved into a digs, you've now got your bathroom, your bedroom, and you've now got a separate box called essentials, and inside your essentials will be your charger and your laptop. In the next example, we've actually got the essentials as a separate thing, and inside of the essentials will be the computer, the cutlery, and the toilets. Then the last one will be the essentials, and inside the essentials will be a mapping of the same rooms outside of it. So it'll have the bathroom, the bedroom, and the kitchen, and inside of those will be the items for the essentials. This is the example of the adult where you're moving. and you need the heavy items to be in a separate section. So what we've done is we've got the bedroom and the bathroom and the kitchen being their separate sections inside of the heavy items. So you've duplicated these boxes, but there were constraints because of the heavy items, and that's why you've gotten with this strategy. Then the last example, you can see there's an exact copy of the main house and the guest house because there's an external room that needs to be handled. So you don't want to mix the guests' stuff as well as your stuff. You don't want your bedding to go into the guest room. You want them to be completely separate. Cool. So what does the official React codebase or project team recommend? Is there a recommended way to structure React projects? React doesn't have an opinion on how you put files into folders. That said, there are a few common approaches popular to the ecosystem you may want to consider. So one popular grouping would be by features or roots. So this would be you have a common section with all of the common components. You would have the feed section. So this would be a feed feature. And you'd have the profile and have all of the profile components underneath that folder. You could also group by file type. So this would be you'd have the API files as well as the components all within their own category. So let's talk about some tips when we decide on a strategy for project folders. So some basic ones would be try to avoid too much nesting. As soon as you start going very deep into a nested structure, it becomes a lot more difficult to have that mental image of what's happening in your project. Then don't overthink it. So if you start spending more time trying to structure your project than actually working in the project, you could be wasting time. As long as things kind of are intuitive and make sense. For me, I actually, if it takes me more than a couple of seconds to think about where something should go, then I've probably not structured things correctly. And that's probably when you need to start changing things. For me, it's like quite intuitive that certain things need to go in a certain way, but that might also just be from experience in working with multiple React code bases. So one strategy which works quite well for me is the let it grow organically. So you can start off with a flatter structure, and as soon as the domain demands it, you could then start expanding. So let's say you start working in a particular way where you've got more roots, and let's say you've got roles where you've got a staff member, an employer, and a user. You can then start to think about how it might work having components based on those roles. Then another good tip is to try and keep files that change together close together. This principle is known as collocation, and it's good for, let's say you've got tests and you've got your JavaScript and your CSS files. If they're all in, let's say the component is a button component, if you need to work on them and you want to quickly go between them, they'll all be in the same folder, and then you can just click between them and edit them quite easily. You won't have to like navigate all the way up your tree and your structure in your directory, and then have to go down to the CSS section to then edit the button, and then go back up to the component section and edit the JavaScript. It'll all just be in one folder, sorry. Then the advanced section. If you have more folders than files, then you've probably gone too far. I've seen some code bases where they completely over-engineer the entire folder structure, and they'll just be way too many folders to navigate, and it gets pretty unwieldy, especially in the smaller projects. So try to avoid that. Don't force a pattern at the cost of repeating yourself. I've also seen projects where they have, like, let's say you've got your button component. They'll have a button component in components. They'll have a button folder in your CSS, and they'll have a button folder in their tests. And so whenever you add a new component, like let's say that you add a header component, you'll then need to add a header folder to component. You'll need to add a header folder to the CSS styles. You'll need to add a header folder to the tests, and then maintain it like that. And whenever you start moving things around or restructure, you need to make the same changes mirrored in every one of these sections. So it does work in larger projects, but I think in smaller projects it can be quite overkill, and it can be quite domain specific. And that's the next topic, which is each domain might have a specific structure that makes sense. So try to identify it. So I mentioned previously, if you have role-based folder structures. So if your staff members or your employers or your students or whoever you're dealing with have a particular type of component that only they use, it might make sense to segment them into that way. I've also seen a structure where they use URL-based structures. So if you've always got a root URL, and then you'll have a section like a dashboard, and then in that dashboard, you drill down deeper and deeper. I've seen some folder structures which actually mimic the URL, and then it can be easy to find where the component is based on the URL you're currently on. Then the last one would be to try avoid going 5 levels deep. Sometimes it makes sense to go 5 levels, but when you start going 6 or 7 or 8 levels deep, then unless your project really needs it, you should try and avoid that. Cool. Different types. So let's look at a small app. So the pros, very easy to start. So what we've got here is we've got a public package, we've got an index, we've got a source, and then we've kind of just got a flat structure of components, and we've got the button.tsx, we've got the tests, we've got the CSS, and we'll have the same folder structure underneath each one of these other ones. The cons of this one, as it grows, it gets harder to manage. I'm sure a lot of you would have experience with component folders that just go on and on because everyone defines everything as a component, and then it just becomes like a massive, unwieldy folder. Atomic. This one is quite an interesting one. And it's based on the atomic design where you have atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. And so you could have very, very small components like the button components, and you will have larger components of molecules which are made up of the smaller atoms. You'll have organisms which are kind of a like compound of those molecules. Then you'll have the templates and the pages, which then basically it's the, everything is comprised of the smaller parts. So the pros of this is it's modular by design, and the components can be reused. The cons, it's quite complex, knowing that each smaller part is used by the bigger parts. And sometimes if you're trying to debug where information is going, you'll have to jump between a lot of different parts. It can also suffer from prop drilling if not handled correctly. So I've seen some situations where you'll have dependency injection all the way down, and then sometimes when an event needs to be passed back up, you'll have to bubble the event all the way back up. You can obviously use context or Redux or some other technology to handle that sort of thing, but you do need to be careful with that. Cool. Then you get onto a larger kind of structure, and I think this is probably going to be more familiar to those that work in the industry. And this would be something like having a components, a layouts, and a pages kind of section. This kind of thing is very useful for larger code bases. If you implement this pattern correctly, then deleting something like the store layout, or sorry, the store product page, will mean that the children shouldn't be impacted. The children shouldn't impact other components. So deleting this carousel shouldn't actually impact any other part of the website, because this carousel should only be used by the store product page. Cool. Then the cons, the whole team needs to be on board with this sort of structure, and they need to purposely design components in a way that if they know that this carousel is only going to be used by the store product page, it needs to live in that directory. There might be situations where you're not sure. So you say, okay, this carousel, it's quite an important component. We can imagine in the future we might want to use it in other parts of our site. And so you might just put it in the component section just in case for future use. And then in the future, it might not even be used by anything outside of the store product page. So you do need to have intention when you create these components. Sometimes the distinction between layout, container, and component can get quite blurry. Also pages as well. I've had quite a lot of discussions with team members about whether a component, if something is a layout or a container. I've seen people make the argument that a thing is a container as soon as it has state management. But I've had situations where very small components can have state management, but they're definitely components, not containers. And so sometimes the distinction can get quite niche to the topic that you're dealing with. So yeah, it's you kind of need to you need a consensus between the team on where things need to go. Cool. So then tests. So this is quite a good one. I've seen people argue for both sides, and this is kind of where there are multiple approaches, and you can use each one or whichever one makes sense to your particular use case. So on the left, what we've got here is a structure where the tests are in the folder of the component. On the right, what we've got is we've got a separate folder called tests, and that's got a mirrored structure where it's got the button, the drop-down, and the header, and inside of that is the tests. So the structure A will have the benefit of being easy to kind of use, and the things are tightly coupled. Structure B will have the advantage of kind of having a cleaner code base because you've got all your tests in one place. So if you want to make a sweeping change to all of your tests, you just need to do it in one place. And you'll be able to have better, how do I explain, composition of tests. Sometimes you might have like a higher order component test, which needs to go in the test component, and then you can do a bit more management of the tests in that way. Or you could, if you need to update the tests in a particular way, it's kind of easier because they're all in the same place. There could also be situations where you have a team of developers that work on tests purely, and then they could then edit the test section without having to cause any merge conflicts or any other code problems with the rest of the team. The cons of this, though, is that if you move components around or if you add new components, you always need to mirror that in the tests file. Cool. So here are the sources of the talk. Before I end, I do actually want to go through something quickly. I just want to go through the React project, just because I think it's interesting to look at other projects and get a feel for what they do. And yeah, I just want to get that quickly. Hold on. So this is the React project under Facebook. So this is something I haven't completely covered, and that would be the fixtures. Fixtures is a way of getting external libraries and grouping them in a way. So it's kind of like a project in a project. So in this particular example, we've got React, we've got fixtures. I'm going to go into the DOM folder. Inside of that, we've got the source project. So inside of that, we've now got components. And so inside of the components, we'll then have more fixtures. Inside of that fixtures, we'll have the buttons. And then we've now finally got the index.js, which is the button. So quite a few layers deep. But when you're such a big project as React, then it kind of makes sense. Cool. That's everything I wanted to cover. So I'm happy to answer any questions and yeah, go through anything else.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Will. Right off the bat, there's one that I've got pending for you. I'm guessing you review a lot of code. What is an anti-pattern that you see people do on a frequent basis with regard to project structures?
I think the biggest one is they put the component in the wrong place, or people could be opinionated on where the component should live. And I've seen kind of two scenarios of people being overly scared to duplicate code And so they'll go through great lengths to have these reusable components that can be used. And they spend all of this time making these composition of components, and it can be inherited in these properties, and then it gets used twice. And like, I have no problem with someone copy pasting the same component twice with slight changes if it's only going to be used twice. I know some
particularly
people
with
will
like
have
modern server-side rendered frameworks. Like I ran into the exact same thing on a project I worked on, where there was so much pain to make a heading component reusable in 2 places, and it would have been so easy to just have 2 heading components. Okay, interesting. And the opinionation with regard to positioning of components, again, I feel it's a little related to again, like whatever framework or meta framework you're using for the project. So like I'm a big fan of Next.js, and I've worked extensively on Nuxt, and storing like any components within a pages folder always feels a little bit strange to me. But I guess, like you say, it's easier to have an opinion on this. And the thing that I love most about React is that you do have this freedom to really pick what suits the project, and like based on the requirements. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, another thing I didn't actually touch on, but I guess it's related to the tests section, is I've seen people put their Redux and so I use Sagas in my project, but I've also used MobX before. I've seen them put that logic inside of the components folders. So then all of the logic with that component will be in that section. And that's something I find strange because I've never needed to have that level of separation. But it's entirely up to whatever you need in that situation.
It's so interesting. It's a pretty common pattern with Redux toolkits. Like they create slices and they create components within the slices, and it's always felt a little bit bizarre for me. I totally get the logic. If you do have something that is as neatly contained and constrained as, like you maybe have 2 components that share global state, but it just seems so strange to have this incredible tool, and you kind of lock it down into a really small spot. I haven't worked in any projects that have such neat outlines around how you use state. Like it generally leaks a little bit all over the show, and you need to grab things from all over. So it's a bit of a weird pattern, and I could see that in some cases it could work, but again, it's totally project dependent. I see that we do have a question here. Samira has asked, what would sorry, go ahead.
What would fixtures look like in a smaller project? So you could still have fixtures in a smaller project. It would be, I can't remember the name for it now. Facades, I think that's the word for it. Where you could extract an external library if you want to lock down the version for it, and you could then put into your project. So let's say, for example, if you wanted the Lodash library and you wanted to put that into your project, but you didn't want to use npm install to install the library. So you wanted a fixed version that wasn't dependent on an external package manager. You could then copy the entire code base, put it into your project under fixtures, and then that would be like that. I hope that answers your question. So basically, what I'm saying is the size of the project wouldn't really influence the fixtures folder.
And then I see we've got another question from Simon.
How do you handle assets? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
In the more advanced folder structure, how do you handle assets like images that are only used in one component?
Cool, that's a good question. I'm going to go actually just to one of the slides. I think it's the large slide. Cool. No, actually it's wait, it is here. Yeah, cool. So in this example, you could actually have an image folder inside of components if they were tightly coupled. So you could have an assets folder, and then inside assets you would have the images. and that would be all the images for the project. But you could also have a image section inside of this carousel, for example. Let's say an image was only used in that carousel. Yeah, that could be one way to handle it. Bear in mind, you do need to then handle situations like if you have Webpack that's building or compiling your application, you need to make sure that it is using regex to then find those images and then extract them and put them in the correct place. So there is a bit of extra complexity that gets involved when handling this kind of structure, but it's definitely doable. I hope that answers your question, Simon.
Awesome. We have a question from Andres. I believe this is Omega. With files, is it better to have helper functions of all components in one file, or should every helper function be on a file related to the component that it's being used on?
What do you mean by helper function? Do you mean like a hook or?
I'm guessing like utility functions, and this kind of probably boils down to the idea of co-location. Again, project dependent. If I were working, I mean, like if we use a custom hook, for example, Simon, at what point would you have a co-located custom hook as opposed to having a folder of hooks?
So in a similar way to the previous example that I've given with the images, you could then have a similar thing with utils or helper functions. And so if the helper function was specific to that component, you could then put it in that folder structure. One thing to bear in mind is you can always add more structure. You can always add more boxes and more files. It's whether it makes sense to do that. And whether the nesting starts becoming like harder for the team to manage. Knowing that there's a util function that is in that component that is that particular thing can get harder to debug than if there's just a global utils function. But obviously, if your global utils function is getting so big and unwieldy that you need to start splitting things up, then it's kind of case-by-case situation.
Sanity should prevail.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That looks like about everything that we have from chat. And that's pretty much all from my side as well. Justin, any closing notes?
Yeah, just to say thanks very much to Will for the talk and to Mike for organizing everything, getting that going. We just have Ben who's joined us from Vulkan Labs, who sponsored these in the past, and I'm just going to add him to the stream for a bit, and he's going to just say a few words. Yeah, thanks again, Will.
Cool. Thanks.
Hey folks, it's me again. I'm always here. First, I'd like to thank Will very much for his very novel approach to a talk and making my life very difficult, because now I realize I don't have to put everything in one file. Yeah, Vulkan Labs very much appreciates React and its community, and we're going to continue sponsoring this as far and as long as we can. And we'd just like to mention that we are a software consultancy. We specialize in React, TypeScript, and scaling relational databases. We are hiring for all roles. Our salaries start from 20,000 up to 125,000 a month. And if you want to do React stuff and you want to do it the best way you possibly can, you can send us an email at careers@vulkanlabs.com.
Cool.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I've worked with Ben before. I can attest the fact that he uses more than one folder. So he's definitely got the best React project structures, and you can definitely learn a lot from him.
There you go, Ben, from the horse's mouth.
I'm glad to hear it.
Great. Mike, anything else from you, or shall we close?
No, that's pretty much it. If anyone is interested in chatting with us or presenting a talk, feel free to reach out to me. You can contact me on the meetup group. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be as advanced as Will here. You know, he's earned his stripes, but I think it's gonna be a lovely platform to hear from anyone what they're doing in React in Africa. And yeah, once more, Will, thank you so much. Nice to get some insight from you, and thanks for taking the time and effort to prepare this talk.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again, Will. See you all at the next one. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.